There was a book, there was a battle, there was an exile. December 7th, 2020 begins the 1500th anniversary of St Columba. We engaged with the brilliant minds of our major church leaders, asking them, why should we celebrate St Columba? How is he relevant today? And why the next generation should be curious about him.
Growing up as a Northern Presbyterian, saints weren't really part of our faith package. I knew a little bit about St Patrick, having lived and worked in the surrounding area of Slemish, but St Colmcille, my knowledge was association with Iona, and that was about it. And that was really it until about 9 years ago when I moved here, and I became aware that his birthplace was actually Garton here. I started to read around the last couple of weeks about St Colmcille. Two impressions really struck me. First one was really to do with his sense of drivenness and passion that he had, certainly as a young man. One of the quotes that I came across was, some portraits of Columba which have come down to us represent him as a passionate, domineer, unscrupulous and vindictive. And certainly this appears to have represented his character in his younger days. But it's not how you start the race that matters, it's how you finish it. And certainly in Columba's life there was a change. Like many of the characters in the Bible, he was a man of faith but had clay feet. And like Peter and his denials, David and his many messes in life, Columba was the same.
My first interest in Columba goes back about 20 years, whenever I moved to County Sligo. And the church that I served in there was called St Columba's Church. It was the site of one of his monasteries. But just 2 miles from where we lived was the site of the Battle of Culdrevna, the Battle of the Books. It's an incredible story, really. It all comes down to an argument between Columba and Finian about copying one of the Gospels. It ended up in this terrible battle when 3,000 lives were lost. As a result of that, Columba goes off into voluntary exile. He goes off in his boat, as we know, to Iona, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Back about 1890, a young curate from Castlederg arrived here in Derry. His name was William Aloysius Doherty. He became more popularly known as Father Willie. And Father Willie, when he arrived here, set himself the task of educating the people around here, so that in 1897 it was the 1300th anniversary of the death of St Columba. And he made this a very big day. So much so that he took a group of men down to St Colum's Wells, which is down the hill. There's a large stone there, so there was, which was revered by the people of the local area because it was called St Columba's Stone. They believed it was a kneeling stone where Columba would have knelt to pray. Father Willie and the men dug this stone, this huge boulder, out of the ground, and they took it to the sacristy. And there they left it for 1 year. And during that year, they built what's behind me here as the Calvary. And right in the centre of the Calvary is the stone that they dug out over 100 years ago.
As we know, Columcille was a monk, whether he was in the monastery here on the hill of Derry or in Iona. And monastic life, living in community, is a really challenging experience. But what lies at the heart, what is the secret of monastic life, is that ability to do little things well. Columba did little things well in all his monastic communities, and that created a patchwork, just like the work that we have behind us on the altar, of little stones all making up something beautiful. The monastic, disciplined lifestyle created a whole way of life that enabled beautiful manuscripts to be made, other beautiful artifacts to be designed. The monastic life and the discipline of it was part of what made Columba great. That still has a lesson for us today. Doing little things well builds great things for the future.
When Columcille left Ireland, it was as a pilgrim for Christ. He was following where God led him, and among other things it led him to extraordinary creativity. He was a scribe. They had to write out by hand all of the Psalms, all of the scriptures, all of the books at that time, and he was a very good scribe, they say. But after him came generations of scribes. That was all part of this creative energy that flowed from the kind of life that Columcille started to live with his little group of monks in Iona.
Aurora rutilat, lucis pronuncia, laetos nos excitat, a somnolencia, volunte celebre festum recolere, Columbae venerabilis.
Aurora rutilat, lucis pronuncia, laetos nos excitat, a somnolencia, volente celebro festum recolere, Columba venerabilis.
That song that I gave a very poor rendition of is actually a hymn for the Lauds, the service of Lauds for the Feast of St Columba on the 9th of June, Aurora Rutilat, the arrival of the dawn. So it's a song to start off the feast day of St Columba, which is the 9th of June, and that's the day that Columba is supposed to have died. Now on the 7th of December we celebrate the day he was born, his birthday. Columba, which is his name in Latin, or Columcille as he was known in Irish or in Scottish Gaelic, is certainly one of the most important people to come from the 6th century. He was born in the 520s. In fact, we know very little about him, but the fact that we know anything at all for somebody who lived so far back is testament to how important they were in their own time. His name, of course, means the dove, which is the international symbol of peace and peacemakers. And given that his life extended across the whole of Ireland, Scotland, and into the north of England, places that maybe today are divided by politics and religion, but it's maybe timely that we remember through the story of Columcille that we all have similar historical roots. His story is a very timely reminder to us of all that.
Qui fitum illis, mitis affabilis, vultu vilaris, vi venerabilis, ortur vi nobilis, vi status stabilis, opore castus et mente.
We're living at a time of extraordinary change, and that's very disconcerting for many people. Who knows what the future is going to be like? Now, remember, he lived at a time of extraordinary change. Ireland wasn't all Catholic when Columba was born. Most of his family were half Christian, half pagan. There were terrible tensions between Christians and pagans in Ireland and in Scotland. And that was a time of huge change. Now, I think Columcille is a sign of hope in the midst of that. That at a time of change, there isn't just threat, there's tons of potential, tons of possibility. And I think Columcille invites us to see this time of change that can be disconcerting as a time of possibility far more than of threat.
When he was priested, Columba returned to the northwest, and the High King of Ireland, King Aed, gave him 200 acres on high ground in the island of Derry. And he built his first abbey here on this site. And it was unusual because it was built in a north-south orientation, which is quite unusual because most churches are built in an east-west orientation. This church today continues to stand in a north-south orientation and is built on medieval stones of Dove Reglis.
We developed the Columba Heritage Trail as part of the Year of Culture. The relevance of the Columba Heritage Trail to our work is that it's a symbolic linking of the east and west banks of the city. It's an opportunity for us to bring people to places of worship, places of other faith traditions, and show people that they are very beautiful places and very welcoming. And importantly, it is an opportunity for us to share a common Christian heritage, share a culture and a heritage that is important to all of us and that predates the divide.
This whole area, Donegal and Derry, are just full of places of significance for St Columba, and we have already walked 270 kilometres, starting in Columcille, going all through the Gaeltacht, out onto Torrey Island where there was an early foundation, through Garton, Letterkenny where there's the Cathedral of St Ewan and St Columba, and through East Donegal into Derry City, and then finally up to Shrove from where Columcille left Ireland. It is a Slí Columcille, a Camino. We found that when we walked it, it had all the richness of a Camino, where you set off each day in the beautiful surroundings with this saint as something of an inspiration there in the background with you. It was every bit as good as walking the Camino de Santiago through northern Spain. You didn't have to get up as early in the morning to escape the heat, and the odd day when it rained on us, sure, that's what a pilgrimage is about. We are hoping that this will be picked up, and that for years to come, people will walk our Irish Camino, the Slí Columcille, all through Donegal into Derry, and maybe ultimately on through Ireland and up into Argyll and through Scotland and ending up in Iona. Wouldn't it be an amazing Irish-Scottish Camino?
When you visit this city, you can take part in the Columba Heritage Trail. The trail starts in St Colmcille Park with the iconic statue of Columba and weaves its way through the Peace Bridge and onto 4 churches of the Christian faith traditions in the area. The trail is an artistic animation of the public realm and has lots of images and symbolism of peace and reconciliation.
My grandmother, born in Cavan, and my grandfather, born in Lisnaskea, took their family, including their eldest son, my father, when they migrated from Lisbon to Australia in the 1950s. None of them returned. And yet their journey shaped so much of my childhood. As I've explored a little of St Columba's story, I read of a man who, though most of the second part of his life was spent in Iona, Scotland, never left Ireland in his heart. This was home. This was the place that shaped him, that shaped his ministry. St Columba belonged in and to this island, despite the fact his life, his journey, took him to Scotland and down through the centuries to the world beyond. Journeys are the in-between. The time we move from what is known, what is secure, what gives us comfort, to a place which is as yet unclear, unknown to us. As we reflect on this 1500-year anniversary of St Columba's birth, may his journey and the energy he put to each step along that journey enthuse, inspire, encourage us to explore each moment of the journeys our lives take us upon.
I think isolation and being alone is something that all of us are really uncomfortable with nowadays. Whereas in the past there was a lot more of a sense of having space for ourselves and time for ourselves, whereas now we're bombarded with company, whether it be real or virtual. And the last number of months have shown us that actually time by ourselves is something to be valued, but something that shouldn't, there needs to be that balance of togetherness and being with people and by ourselves. For me, church is about community, but it's about a community that helps the individual by ourselves realize our full potential in who we are as people made by God, loved by God, enriched by God. And I think Columba's isolation wasn't actually just about being alone. You know, he went with a group of believers, with a group of followers. He knew what it was to be alone, but he was actually with people. And there's something about capturing that realizing our value as individuals, but knowing that we're made to be together is really, really important. So it's again that balance in life of being content in ourselves, but knowing the richness that comes from being with others.
Part of our communal journeying with Columba here in the city of Derry and beyond, particularly based on collaboration between the churches and different groups in our society, has not just been to remember somebody from the past. It's been developing together a shared story about the wonderful characters that we had in our past. That our past is not just times of division and bitterness and pain. And if we can tell a shared story about great figures from our past, we can then create a narrative about great things in store in the future for our young people. I hope that this project about Columba will be to build a foundation on which we can build something that we will continue to be proud of in the future, and that people can look back on this generation and say, yeah, they were good people, and Columba was part of the inspiration for them.
We're delighted that the church leaders have come together to launch the celebrations of the 1500th anniversary of Columba, Columcille.
Blessed are you, God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We give thanks for your grace, which shone out so brightly in the life of St Columba.
We bless you for his missionary spirit that bore your love and mercy across the hills and over the seas. Give us such generous hearts today.
Your grace enabled him to be a bringer of peace after a time of conflict. Give us such courageous hearts today.
You inspired him to build communities of faith, which bore the fruits of hope and beauty. Give us such creative hearts today.
You blessed his witness from the shores of Gartan Loch to the lonely Isle of Iona. Give us such refreshed hearts today.
We bow thee in the sight of the Father who created us, in the sight of the Son who redeemed us, in the sight of the Spirit who purified us, in love and mystery. Amen.